my name's Rachel, and who wants to talk about books that cause childhood trauma? Today we are talking about Left Behind, the books. Well, I'm talking about one book because I recently reread it, but I am going to touch on the films and the books created by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. These are the Fundy Apocalypse Rapture novels that have sold 80 million copies. I know, I am as shocked and distraught as you are. Specifically, I am here to talk about this one, which is the first book in the series of Left Behind books for children. Now, if you have no idea what I am talking about when I say Left Behind or Rapture, lucky you. Left Behind is a series of Christian books about the coming apocalypse according to Christians. Certain Christians, I should say. If you grew up in Fundyland, you probably read these, or your parents read the adult versions, and you may have even watched the movies. I know I certainly did. More than once. It was one of my dad's favorites. My dad also, his only owned book series was the Left Behind books. It was the only books I ever saw him buy or have at all. Like, he didn't go to the library. He was not a big reader. These are the only books besides the Bible I've ever seen my father pick up. As I said, there were also the film adaptations with Kirk Cameron. Yes, brother of that girl from Full House who's also a Fundy. There's also newer movies with Kevin Sorbo. Yes, from Hercules. And an even newer one with Nicolas Cage. That one I have not seen, and I will avoid like the plague. This is a series which has garnered significant attention and controversy for its portrayal of the apocalyptic events according to certain Christian theology, which some of them call the end times, which is based on a specific interpretation of the last book of the Bible, Revelations. Now, not all Christians subscribe to this interpretation, the one presented in these books and these films, but the sects that I grew up in do subscribe to this interpretation heavily. Having left Fundyland, now being an agnostic adult, seeing it through that lens, I would now argue that they are propaganda that promotes Christofascist ideology. The typical setup for the Left Behind premise is that the true Christians in the end times get raptured. They disappear from the earth and they get taken to heaven, including children over a certain age, which it depends on who you ask over what age they are above the age of believing, where they have to make a choice on what they believe or not. And then everybody else who is not a real Christian, which we'll talk about what it means to be a real Christian, gets left behind. And then they have to deal with the end times. So you can see that reading this at literally 8 years old, thinking if I don't believe to a certain degree, I'm going to wake up one day, my entire house is going to be empty, and I'm going to be orphaned. And it's kind of like a running joke, not a joke in the sense of like, haha, that's so funny, but haha, it's so funny, we're all in therapy now. That many of us in the 90s when we were growing up, if like our parents would like run to a neighbor's house for something and they'd like, end up being there for 20 minutes and we didn't realize they were gone, and then we're like, wait, where the fuck is my family? And the whole house is empty and we're like, oh shit, the only person here is me. I must have been left behind and everyone got raptured. I want to tell you the structure of this video. We're going to do an overview of this book, Left Behind for Kids. Book 1 is called The Vanishings. I'm going to go over some specific language used in the book. The book is just basically like an entire 145 page book of emotionally manipulative language, which is a tactic this book uses in order to proselytize to minors, because that is quite literally like all this book is. Written to emotionally manipulate children into becoming Christian. I'm going to explain how the book promotes Christofascist ideology, and I'm also going to explain that some of the ideas that are held within these books are this very specific ideology on what it means to be a real Christian, a true believer, which is what Fundies believe, versus like just being a Christian. Because these books, like all of Fundy media, hammer into you the idea that believing in God does not make you a Christian. There's a saying that they tell us in Fundyland, like, even the devil knows God exists and that doesn't make him eligible to go to heaven, right? Accepting Christ and living your life for him is what makes you a true Christian, a real believer, and eligible for heaven or eligible for being raptured at the end times, which they tell us at any moment could happen. And they have been saying for decades that the rapture is going to happen any minute now, that Jesus is coming back. All of these signs that we are in the end times and that Jesus is coming back soon. They always say this stuff. Belief that you have to do this very specific thing in order to be a real Christian, a true believer, and be eligible for heaven is part of a Fundy ideology. The purpose of it to be a stripping of individuality. What they would call it is dying to self. They believe that all humans, even babies, are born with sin nature. So in order to be saved, we have to die to our old ways, our human nature, our desire, our human innate desire to sin all the time, so that we can be truly alive by being saved by Jesus. And being saved by Jesus means the Holy Spirit enters you in a non-sexual way. Our self is dying and we become more like Jesus. This belief system is predicated on the stripping of individuality. And while the movement undoubtedly provides a sense of belonging and shared identity for followers of the church, it also exerts significant pressures that limit individual autonomy and the expression of diverse belief and values and existences, such as queer folks. I think in particular the stripping of individualism is hardest on girls and femme-presenting kids in Fundyland, since we are so often supposed to be under male headship, and this puts us in a lot of dangerous situations. The rigid gender roles can suppress young girls and femme-presenting folks' opportunities for self-expression and hinder the development of any unique identity. We are expected to speak and behave and even appear in a certain way, the way we dress, the way we do makeup, the way we do our hair, in a way that is God-honoring and dying to self. So like for instance, even the way I have my hair now, I would not have been allowed to have my hair like this when I went to Fundy schools. Everything is about being God-honoring and dying to self. There's no individualism. And this is actually relevant to something that I want to talk about. Obviously, everyone here knows that I typically wear wigs. This is my natural hair. I regularly get asked why, and it's because my natural hair kind of sucks. I'll show you pictures. This is my natural hair. When I don't do anything to it, I just let it, shampoo, dry, and air dry. I shaved off most of it back in 2021, and as you can see, I have a shit ton of hair. I then regretted how much I took off, and I've been trying to grow out the top of it, and I've been experiencing some hair loss because of me wearing headbands and wigs. Even though my hair is super thick, it's thinning out at the top. I have extremely thick, unmanageable, dry hair that's very prone to breakage, and I feel like I have tried everything and nothing works. So I shaved it off and I wear wigs, which I've been threatening to do for years. You can ask my family. Actually, don't talk to my family.
I was contacted by MDHair,
and I initially told them my hair is kind of like a special case. I have really thick hair, so this probably is not something that like I would try out, but they told me to try it out anyways because they're more than just for people with thinning hair, and they asked me to tell you my first impressions, so I did go ahead and try them out. They value honesty and feedback, so I decided to give them a try. HairMD is the world's first medical grade hair loss treatment that is individualized. It's customized to each person to deal with what's causing your hair loss, and they have a quiz that asks you about like diet, medical issues, and if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, which thank God I am no longer doing either of those things. Sweet relief. When I uploaded my picture of like what's going on with my hair, they were like, well, you're thinning right here, and I was like, oh my God, it's from the freaking wigs, which is really common when you wear wigs. So that's something that I did want to work on. They sent me their serum, shampoo, conditioner, marine collagen, and customized supplements. My first impression was obviously going to be the smell, because y'all know that I have like chronic migraines and I have to check everything. I have to like smell test everything before I can use anything. I don't wear perfume at all, and Carlos can't wear certain deodorants and he can't wear cologne. Like the first thing I did when I got this box, took off the packaging already before I had filmed like the, opening of this box. I was supposed to like film it. I immediately opened the box and opened the thing because I have to check if I can even use it for the smell. I'm so pleased to say that it's not migraine inducing. It just smells like tart apples, which is fine. It's not perfumey. I'm really happy with the shampoo and conditioner. I feel like they've been doing a good job. My hair is very particular about what conditioner I use, and I'm happy with like the softness of it. I'm able to use the serum when I do my face routine, and then I just take the supplements when I do my anxiety meds, and I've been able to keep up with it for 3 weeks now. It feels healthy, and I am hoping that it will help me regrow my hair up here that I've lost from using headbands and wigs. And I am going to start not wearing my wigs as much because I'm really happy with like how long my hair has gotten, and I'm going to continue using it so that I can keep growing out my hair. I'd like to get it back to like where I had it before, and I'm hopeful that MD Hair can help me do that. So if you're you're trying to get individualized hair care for growth, you can head to my MDHair link down below and use my promo code READS70 to get your first month of individualized hair care products at 70% off. And thank you to MDHair for sponsoring today's video. Evangelical fundamentalism, with its very strict emphasis on these like very strict biblical interpretations, their authority of like religious leadership both in the church and in your home. So like the man of the house is seen as the authority of the house, the spiritual leader of the house. Doctrinal rigidity, upkeeping with like strict religious communal values, strict gender roles, which I'm going to touch on again in a second, and political activism that recommends setting rules and voting in a very specific way that adheres to their religious beliefs, so that they create law based on their religion that everyone has to follow, so that the United States is living in a God-honoring way. My mom once said to me that, and she says now that she never said this to me, but she did say it to me. She said that she worries how God will judge the country, the entire country, based on us allowing abortion to be legal in the United States. She also believes that the United States needs to, for religious reasons, make policy in which we support Israel, not because she cares about Jewish folks, but because she believes that that is what she is supposed to do according to her religion, because of what the Bible says about the end times and Israel, which I don't have a real good understanding of Revelations. All I know is what I was told as a kid and what's in the Left Behind books. I did have a good understanding of it, but this is a really traumatic part of theology that I was taught as a kid, and I have forgotten a lot of it, and I think that my brain did me a huge favor in forgetting a lot of it. I remember like bits and pieces that are scattered, but I try not to recall it very hard beyond what I like recall very easily, because it's just really traumatic, and like rapture trauma fucked with me enough, and I still have nightmares about it, to the point where like I'm not trying to get into that. So actually I would really appreciate it if like people who are interested in theology or Christians would just not do that in my comments. Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. This is a really, the apocalypse shit that I was taught as a kid really fucked me up, and I don't want to hear about it any more than what I have to say here. If you have questions, you can ask me and I'll answer to the best of my ability, but I'm not here to get a sermon, so let's not do that today. Sorry. So what I was saying is my mom believes that voting for things like the United States allowing abortion to be legal is something that God will judge the entire country by. That's what she said to me. And I said, I don't think that God would judge you for somebody else allowing a certain law. And she said, well, I think he does. And I stopped the conversation there because I didn't realize how deep into christofascism my mom was until that moment. It was like 6 years ago, and that was pretty terrifying for me. So no, thank you. So they believe in creating laws, literal like laws and policy that other people have to follow. So I want to go further into the individualism issue, but I feel like in order to do that, I need to actually tell you what's inside the book in order to make a stronger case. So let's go over the books so that I can use it to showcase how this issue presents in Christian media. Okay, so this book is about 4 kids, Judd, Vicky, Ryan, and Lionel. We get chapters centering on all of them. It's not written in first, it's written in third, and the voice is very much Jerry and Tim, who I assume have not spoken to actual teenagers since they were actual teenagers, and instead have been speaking at teenagers for decades, including in the writing of this book. This book is 3 acts essentially. So the first is the setup, where we're setting up who each kid is and how they have failed to be a particular kind of Christian, a fundy. Act 2 is them right before the rapture, and then Act 3 is them realizing that their families are gone and they have been orphaned or left behind. It starts off, our first character is Judd. Judd is the one that I read the first 2 books in the series when I was 8 years old. 8, 9. Judd is the character I remember the most because he was the character I feared being, but I was really at that point a Lionel. These books are created by Tyndale, which if you have not heard, me and Tyndale do not get along. This book was published in 1998, which that tracks. I probably would have read it around like 2001 or so. And the dedication reads, "To our own kids," who I wouldn't be surprised if they don't talk to their fathers anymore. I mean, I know I don't talk to mine. So our first character that we get introduced to is Judd the Runaway. All of them have like their own, like they're bad in this sort of way. So like Lionel is the liar, except he's not lying. I'll get there. Vicky is, I don't know, bad because she smokes cigarettes. Oh god. And Judd is the runaway. Judd, his parents and his siblings, he's a teenager. He's like 16 years old, and he's a teenager who just wants to like hang out with his friends, but he wants to be grown. It gets introduced in a way that's basically like, his family is so nice, but Judd doesn't appreciate them, and Judd, he just wants to be grown. And Judd gets a credit card. It's supposed to be in his father's name, but it accidentally says Junior, and he's Junior. So he uses it to buy a ticket to England so that he can run away. He doesn't really have a plan beyond that. He just wants to, like, the way it's written is that he wants to stick it to his family by running away and showing how grown he is, which is like not what kids typically run away for at 16. Anyway, and it's very obvious that he's like, oh, I'm so annoyed that my family is Christian. That's so annoying. So his siblings are Christian, his parents are Christian, and they really want him to be saved, but he just finds it all very stupid. So his first chapter ends with him getting to himself to the airport so that he can run away with the plane ticket he bought with his credit card that's accidentally in his name. Chapter 2 is Vicky the Rebel. This is the one that I kind of want to hone in on more because this is where the book starts to get like astronomically stupid. The first line of her first chapter is, Vicky Byrne was 14 and looked 18. FBI! She lives in a trailer park with her mom, her dad, and her younger sister. She has an older brother like in Michigan or something. She's riding the bus, and it says, the bus driver refused to pull away from the trailer park until everyone was seated, so the two senior trailer boys who had already found seats rose and scowled and insisted that people make room. Some rich kids, which they all seem to be if they didn't live near Vicky, so we're like making sure that we know that Vicky is poor, begrudgingly made room. The first day, Vicky had found herself the last to find a seat. She looked to the front where most of the black kids sat. They had to be among the first on the bus because no one seemed to want to sit with them either, and wouldn't sit with them even if they offered a seat. Okay, I don't know why that was written in here. Vicky had been raised to believe black kids were beneath her too. No black people lived in the trailer park, and she didn't know why they were supposed to be inferior other than they were a different color. Her father had said they were lazy, criminals, stupid, and yet that was how Vicky saw her father himself, at least until 2 years before. So in all of these books, there is the gender expectation that really jumps off the page like initially is how important fathers are in the lives of children and bringing them up to be Christians in a way that mothers are not, which is very typical of fundy culture, is that if you don't have a father who is making sure that you're on the right path, you're not on the right path. Well, fuck moms, am I right? Every single kid in this is like, there's a lot of talking about the importance of fatherhood, which is very common. Like, if you listen to any Christian conservative person, they will talk about fatherhood being important until they're blue in the face. The first person that's coming to mind is like Candace Owens. Yeah, it's very common. So her dad's a racist, but her dad's also a piece of shit. Vicky's probably a racist, but this doesn't get dealt with. It's just sort of thrown in here randomly. Vicky's mom grew up Christian and often reminds her dad, don't forget, Tom, that was the way I was raised, and it was not all bad. We could do with some church around here. Could we, Vicky's mom? So at the trailer park, they often have dances, I guess, where all the trailer park people get together. I used to live in a trailer park. It was mostly old people, and I don't recall anything like this, but I don't know, maybe trailer parks were different in 2001 than they were in 1994 or wherever I lived in a trailer park. Who knows? I do remember all the old people lining up and doing some sort of parade. I don't know, I was really little. Anyways, one day at one of the trailer park yeehaws, they have a speaker show up and said, if you'll just indulge me for a few minutes, I promise not to take more than 5 minutes of your time, and I plead with you to let your children hear this too. So some guy shows up to proselytize. Vicky's like, the speaking didn't seem all that great, but there was a feeling, an atmosphere. That's called emotional manipulation. It's what they use to get you to do cry night at all the Christian youth camps. The man seemed to know what he was talking about and spoke with confidence and authority. The best Vicky could figure out, he was saying that everyone was a sinner and needed God. God loved them and wanted to forgive their sins and promised to take them to heaven when they died. She didn't believe him. She hated her life, and if she did things wrong, they weren't any worse than what her own parents did. They smoked and drank and fought. What was the big deal? And if God loved them, why were they living in a trailer park? Yes, it is as Ethel Cain once said, God loves you, but not enough to save you from the trailer park. Vicky likes to smoke and drink with her friends, even though she's 14. It says Vicky didn't really need a cigarette. It was just something to say that made her feel older. She smoked, yes, but she didn't carry a pack with her. She just smokes off her friends once in a while. As somebody who was doing that at 12 and 13, yeah, I kind of relate to that, to be honest. So at this get-together, this proselytizer speaks for all of 5 minutes and somehow sways Vicky's parents into becoming a Christian. So later that night at their trailer, her little sister Jeannie was already in bed, but her parents were as awake as she had ever seen them. Her mother sat at the tiny kitchen table, her dusty old Bible in front of her. Vicky's father was excited, beaming, smiling, pacing. I want to quit smoking and drinking, Dawn, he said. I want to clean up my whole act. 5 minutes changed this whole man's life. I want to make another joke about 5 minutes changing his life, but I feel like that's not tasteful. So he tells Vicky, I became a Christian tonight, hun, a name he hadn't called her since she was a preschooler. So this is hammering in the idea that because he has accepted Christ as his savior and decided to live for him, that he is now already a better father, which is pretty typical of fundy belief system. And Vicky's mom elaborates that she knew God, she believed in God, but she wasn't living for him. And this is a point that gets hammered home over and over again, is that Christians of all types exist, but fundies believe that you are not a true believer, a real Christian, unless you are living your life for God and trying to die to self. And he's like, we're gonna start going to church. I want to clean up my act. I don't want to drink and smoke anymore. And Vicky's like, I don't want to go to church, because, you know, she's 14 and church is, for a 14-year-old, objectively fucking boring. And her dad's like, when you get saved, you'll want to go to church, which this is an idea that's taught to us, is that if we are falling asleep in church or don't want to go, that's the devil telling us to give into our sin nature, and that we are not living for the Lord enough to have him change us within to desire to go to church. So if you don't feel the desire to go to church, you're not on fire enough for God. You'll want to go to church when you get saved. And Vicky's like, saved from what? And her dad's like, saved from hell, saved from your sin. And he approaches her and she flinches, and she's like, don't touch me. And he's like taking her by the shoulders and saying, I'm not going to hit you, Vicky. Let me hug you. Which this begs the question, was she hit by him before, and why are we not addressing that? But parents apologizing to their children for doing shitty stuff, like his racism that was mentioned earlier, as well as him obviously making it so that she flinches when he reaches for her, which is, you know, abuse, that doesn't get talked about here, because the kids are the bad ones. And if we don't hammer that in, then the kids will not be emotionally manipulated enough to close this book and then be Christians. He says, I know you have no reason to believe me, hun. I don't blame you for not understanding. I've never given you any reason to trust me, so I guess I'll just have to prove it. And her mom's like, let's let God work on her. Or you guys could do the work to apologize and explain how you're going to be a better parent. But now let's focus on Vicky, because oh my god, she smokes cigarettes. She says, we have enough work to do on ourselves, and he's going to help us with that too. But you are a parent. You need to be accountable for the way that you treat your children. Anywhoosie, moving on to Lionel the liar. This chapter makes me uncomfortable. Personality wise, as far as like who I was when I was a fundy kid, I was like Lionel. Living situation and identity wise, I was not like Lionel. And that is because Lionel Washington's parents had moved him out of the inner city of Chicago when he was 6 years old. His mother Lucinda had been a reporter for the Chicago office of Global Weekly magazine. When she was promoted to bureau chief, the family could afford to move out to the suburbs. They were among the first. It does not say black folks or black families, it just says blacks, which makes me uncomfortable, to live in their Mount Prospect neighborhood. When he visits his relatives in Chicago, or when his relatives visited him from the South, his cousins criticized him for losing your blackness. It's like you're white now, which is like saying that living in a suburb is a white thing, like personality wise, which I don't think that these men should be writing books where they say that. It was nice to live in a neighborhood where he didn't have to be afraid to ride his bike anywhere or run with his friends even after dark. Wow, we're doing a lot of stereotyping of black folks, aren't we, Tim and Jerry? And Lionel enjoyed having more things than he was used to having when he was smaller. His cousins, probably to cover their jealousy of his nicer clothes and shoes and the fact that his parents had 2 cars, called him Rich Boy and Whitey and said he might as well not even be black. So that's not appropriate. And then it says that his family traced their roots to the freedom riders on the Underground Railroad railroad during the days of slavery, and many of his ancestors had been active in the civil rights movement, fighting for equal opportunities among the races. Ancestors. This was written 40 years after the civil rights movement. Those people would probably still be alive. This is how disconnected Tim and Jerry are from the actual civil rights movement, which makes sense, you know, considering who they are. His mother was one who had proved that a person, regardless of the color of her skin or the housing project she had grown up in, could achieve and make something of herself if she really committed herself to it. This is feeding into the stereotype that black folks just don't want to, which is a common belief held by white fundies. And they believe that black folks have a better chance of doing that if they become Christians. Lionel has a uncle named Uncle Andre who is dealing with substance abuse and addiction, and he believes that God exists but does not believe that God will forgive him. So he does not qualify as being a fundy or being a Christian under fundy standards because he's not living his life for the Lord. And Lionel says, "So you're not really a Christian then?" Andre sighed, "No, I'm not. The truth is, I don't believe God would want to forgive somebody like me. I just keep messing up, and every time I go straight, I know I'm going to mess up again. I've never been a true believer, a real Christian, and I really believe it's too late for me." So even people who believe that God exists but does not care about them will go to hell according to fundy standards. And then he kind of backpedals on that and talks about like Christian music, saying, "This stuff makes for good singing, but remember, half of it's a good way to live and the other is just fairy tales." Wait, but you said you believed that God exists like a page ago. The fuck? Lionel wondered if Uncle Andre really believed that. He was a cool guy and older and seemed wise in the ways of the world. If anybody should worry about what happened to him when he died or when the world came, it should be Andre. But he didn't seem worried. He had a plan, a scheme. He had convinced himself he could play the game well enough to keep his loving family around him. So Andre believes that as long as he, you know, pretends to believe God when he relapses or when he stops doing drugs temporarily, that his family will stick around him. So it's just kind of shitty, playing into like shitty ideas about substance abuse and stuff. And his mom, Lionel's mom, says, "Isn't the Lord wonderful? Don't we have a good God?" Lionel tried to ignore her, but she noticed. "Aren't you glad to serve a God who loves you so much?" And Lionel's like, It says Lionel lied. "Sure, Mama, course I am." He felt terrible, like a hypocrite, like the liar he was. So this was really damaging for me to read as a kid, because if you ever have any doubts, you feel like a Lionel. This, I think, was probably part of the reason that these books were so traumatic for me. The books that actually caused me to have Rapture nightmares. The worst one I remember happened when I was 19. I almost called off work because the one I had was so bad. I was afraid to go back to sleep. I didn't go back to sleep that night. It was really terrible. The Rapture was about to happen, and my mom was there, and she knew, and she grabbed me by the shoulders and she said, "Rachel, you have to get right with God." And then like all of the shit was exploding, and like the sun was exploding, and it was really scary. I've had other ones, but that one was the worst. So I always felt like I was a Lionel because I didn't believe hard enough. So I felt like, am I really a believer, or am I just lying so that I don't go to hell? And that fear cycle is what kept me in the loop of Christianity for years until I was an adult. Our last of the four main characters is Ryan, and this is the one that really talks about fatherhood the most. Ryan is friends with Raimi. Each had a father who was too busy for him. These guys needed each other. Ryan was a little shorter and thicker than Raimi, who was slender and tall and dark like his father. So I need to say as an aside that the plot of Left Behind, the adult books and the movies, is in these books. The same characters that are featured in the adult books and movies are in these books. So Raimi is the son of Raymond, who is the pilot in the movies played by these people in the Left Behind movies. And this guy Raymond gets left behind, and so does his older daughter, Raimi's older sister Chloe. And we see Kirk Cameron's character Buck, Ray, and Chloe as they are dealing with the end times because they got left behind. So Ryan doesn't feature in the grown-up movies, but they had to make them for kids, so they just like stuck kids in where they could to make them have tiebacks to the movies and the books that our parents were watching and letting or making us watch as well. Ryan and Raimi are best friends. Ryan really looks up to Raymond Steele, Raimi's dad, who is the pilot, but he is not a Christian. Raimi's mom is. And then one day Raimi said, "We started going to a new church and we've been learning a lot of things." "Oh no, not this again," said Ryan. "No, this is different, really. At our old church we believed in God and the Bible and everything," which is again hammering in the idea that it's not just about believing in God, it's about living your life for him, dying to self. The church is called what? New Hope Village Church. That's a weird name for a church. No, it's not. It is categorically not. There are a shit ton of churches named things like that. Not every church is named like Catholic churches, like, you know, Saint Francis services, or First Assemblies of God or First Baptist. A lot of churches, like, do y'all think, you really think that you're such an outlier that you're like, wow, New Hope? That's so weird. No, it's not. It's like really common for those of us who grew up in this. But they think that they are set apart. They think they are a New Hope. They think they are episode 4 of Star Wars. No, they don't. Pastor Billings is a really nice guy. He doesn't just read out the Bible and then talk about stuff in general like the guy in our other church. Pastor Billings says everybody look up the verses and follow along with him. And he tells us we should read the Bible every day at home too. Ramey's trying to convince Ryan by saying, I used to like the stories in Sunday school, but when I had to sit in service, I hated it. I thought I would hate it here too, but I don't. Pastor Billings says there's more to being a Christian than just going to church and trying to be good. You want to know what he says? He says we can know God. He showed us from the Bible that God loves everyone and wants them to know him. That's the reason Jesus came to earth. He was actually God, and he wants people to become true Christians by following him, not just doing what he said, but letting him live in our lives. So again, this is how fundies differentiate themselves from everybody else who calls themselves Christians. It's not about doing good. It's not about believing God exists. It's not about reading the Bible. It's about dying to self and living for God. When I do something I knew I was wrong, like breaking your mom's rules, I'd feel bad because I thought that might be enough to send me to hell. I thought if I did enough right things to make up for the wrong things, maybe I'd make it to heaven, but I never knew for sure. Now I want to do right things because I know that's what God wants, but I'm just doing that to thank him for forgiving me and saving me and promising me heaven someday. Do you know what I mean? And Ryan's like, no. And you know what, Ryan, I get it now. I get how silly this looks when you're like, wait a minute, this is just a different version of the same religion. They talk about Ryan's sister, or Ramey's sister, Chloe, who is featured in the Left Behind books and movies. And he's like, we're praying for Chloe. And Ryan's like, oh, so I'm not the only person who thinks that this is baloney then. He's like, it just sounds weird. I don't understand, and I don't think you understand it that much. And Ramey's like, that's true, but I understand enough. This is something that they teach you in Fundyland as well, is that even if you don't understand and have the answers to everything, that's fine, because you don't need to lean on your own understanding, and that God has the answers for everything, and we will find out the answers for things when we get to heaven. So it's an easy way to like excuse away anything that you have doubts over. Ryan hears Raymond Steele and Mrs. Steele, Ramey's parents, having a conversation where basically it's just saying that Mrs. Steele is a fundy and Mr. Steele, Raymond Steele, the pilot, is not. We get to the middle of the book called The Lull. This is where we find out how all of the 4 kids' stories are interconnected and how they are connected to the main characters of the Left Behind books and movies. The evening before the event that would change the lives of Judd Thompson, Vicki Byrne, Lionel Washington, and Ryan Daly, they didn't know each other. In truth, the 4 kids were entwined in a web of connections they knew nothing about. Only of the events of that night, mainly the event late in the evening Chicago time, would push them together. A strange mix of most different people and personalities. That sentence is weird. Okay, so Judd is on the plane to England, flown by Ramey's dad, Ray, and Buck, who is played by Kirk Cameron, and he falls asleep. Vicky talks about being embarrassed by her parents. They like to go out witnessing, which is when you proselytize. That sounded so much like a cult, like the weirdos who tried to talk to people in airports, that Vicky wanted nothing to do with it. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's really no different than Scientology or Jehovah's Witness or Mormons, like people that fundies try to separate themselves from. It's the same. Like, you are what you complain about. All of you are doing proselytizing. You're just okay with only your religion doing it. On the night before all this happened, she gets into it with her dad. She'd always hated when he'd blown up at her in the past, but his new obsession with church and God was worse. The one time she pushed her dad past his limit, rather than yell, he broke down. I think the devil's got a hold of your soul and he won't let go, her father exclaimed. Vicky laughed in his face. What? She said. You really believe that, don't you? You think we're living in the dark ages and maybe I'm a witch, is that it? I didn't say that out loud. Don't you see how crazy you all are? Vicky says. Please just leave me out of this. And her mother says, we just don't want you to go to hell. This is so traumatizing. She's 14. Stop doing this to her. Then the rapture happens, which means that everybody who was a believer, so Ramey, Ryan's friend, Ramey's mom, which is the pilot's wife, Lionel's parents and siblings, Judd's parents and siblings, Vicky's parents and siblings, all of them got raptured. The only parents who didn't get raptured were Ryan's parents. So how does the author orphan Ryan? You're about to find out. But first, Judd, and he's thinking about his mom and how she said his mother hated it when Judd referred to her faith as a religion. She had told him so many times he had memorized it. Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship with God through Christ. Yeah, okay, Judd thought. I'm with Judd. I was taught this and I used to say it when I was a fundy, and now it annoys me because it's not true. Or at least it's not exactly true. It can be both. You can think that you have a personal relationship with Christ, but it's still a religion. religion. Before I stopped talking to my father, he said this to me, and I was like, listen, I went to the schools that you paid for me to go to, sir. I know the doctrine and the dogma, okay? I understand you think it's a relationship and not a religion. However, Christianity, the way that you practice it, is literally fitting the definition of religion. And you know what he told me? He said that they changed the dictionary to make it sound that way. And I was like, your brain is made of worms. Oh my God. Christianity is both a religion, and certain people practice it in a way that they feel they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The only reason that they don't want to call it a religion is because they are constantly trying to, as we've established, set themselves apart. So Judd is on the plane, Rapture happens, and we actually get the scene that it's like the pivotal scene in the Left Behind movies, where we're on the plane driven by Raymond Steele. He's having an affair with his flight attendant, and Buck, the reporter, who is played by Kirk Cameron. The flight attendant is actually played by Kirk Cameron's wife, Chelsea. And there's an old lady who asks Buck, can you go look for my husband? And he's a very religious man, by the way, and he seems to have wandered off without his clothes. So Buck goes around looking for this old guy who seems to have wandered off without his clothes. And then the flight attendant is freaking out because more and more people are saying they can't find the people that they were flying with. And what happens is, according to this version of the belief of what happens when the rapture happens, your body, everything that is like organically you, leaves and goes to heaven, and everything that is not gets left behind. So anything like pacemakers, clothes, belts, hats, shoes, braces, contacts, glasses, it all just like stays in a pile where you are. So like in the movie, you'll see like piles of clothes where a person was when they got raptured, right? It's kind of silly. Basically, the Christians believe that you get Thanos snapped, but all of your stuff gets left behind. So Jesus comes to Thanos snap the Christians, and then all of the people are left wondering what the hell happened. Marvel was basically just like, I feel like we could do that, but with a giant alien. Vicky wakes up in her trailer park and everybody's gone in her family. Her mom was apparently making tea, and like the tea kettle's all fucked up. Think of the implications of this, the worst ones. They're all happening. Like it all descends into anarchy, right? Fires break out because people left things on stoves. Power goes out in places because people were working and now they're not working anymore. Medical issues because people who were, on staff at hospitals. And like, if the Christians who believe this are right, all that's gonna happen, and that's really fucked up. That you're like, yay, I can't wait for this to happen, so the world can descend into anarchy and innocent people can have things go wrong just because other people got Thanos snapped. That's weird as fuck, dude. People's clothes get left behind. Kids over a certain age, and it depends on what Christians you ask, get, left behind because they didn't accept Christ and live for him. Hello, Christ. I'm about to sin again. So Lionel goes into his parents' bedroom, and his parents' bed was still made. His mom and dad's clothes are there, and it says, only for the briefest instant did Lionel wonder if he were dreaming. He knew better. This was real. This was the truth. All doubt and question had disappeared. His family had been raptured as his church, his pastor, and his parents had taught, and he had been left behind. Again, I always felt like a Lionel, and whenever my mom would like go off down the street to, check on her friend or whatever, and I'd be home alone and I didn't know that she had left, I would assume that everybody had gotten raptured and that I, like Lionel, had been lying about my belief and that I was left behind, and at any moment, like, fires were going to break out and I was going to have to be in the end times alone, right? Because I had read this, I would think, no, that's bonkers. If the end times had come, I would know, right? Lionel told himself that same thing. He thought he was dreaming. No, this is it. This is really the rapture. There were so many times that I had used this book to talk myself into believing, oh shit, my family is really gone this time. That's really fucked up for an 8 and 9-year-old, right? How Lionel wished he had been taken to heaven with his family and that he had been found reading his Bible or praying when Jesus came. Only for the briefest instant did Lionel wonder if he were dreaming. I'm going to my parents' church. I called there and a guy named Bruce Barnes is waiting for me. He says there's still hope for everybody left behind. So he was actually on the phone with Vicky, who was, I believe, friends with his sister. They are all starting to make a plan to head to New Hope Church, the most amazingly named church. Ryan wakes up and he has a message left from his mom who says that something weird happened and that she's gonna go to the airport to look for his dad. He's watching the news and he sees a list of people who died and his dad's name is on there. He goes to Ramey's house. Ramey is gone. Ramey Ramey's mom is gone, and he sees Raymond Steele, the pilot, because they flew back after everybody had, disappeared from the plane. Raymond Steele flew back to Chicago. He's at home and he's crying because his wife got raptured, and his son. I mean, in the movie, I don't think he had a son. These were sort of written in after the fact. So he sees Raymond Steele crying in his house. He's like, well, Ryan's not here. I guess I'll just leave, because he's a kid. Like, what's he gonna do with a whole ass grown man crying? Like, he doesn't know what the fuck to do. His parents are gone. He calls his mom's car phone, because car phones were a thing back then. A cop answers and tells him that his mom died. Ryan's parents were not home. He was alone. They didn't get raptured. They died, and according to the, beliefs of this text, they went to hell. So he decides to go to Ramey's church, which is New Hope Church. Judd gets home because the flight turned around, and he realizes that his parents got raptured too. Their clothes are there, his siblings' clothes are there, and he cried. They loved him so much, cared for him, worried about him, and look how he had treated them. He held their clothes close to his chest and closed his eyes. This is so many clothes close to his chest and closed his eyes. Tyndale does not give a shit about editing, I tell you what. Realizing he had gotten just what he deserved. The Christians obsessed with punitive justice are really creepy to me. Like, there's a TikTok that I saw where it's like a Christian being like, you're gonna send him to hell, right? And Jesus is like, no, like, I forgave everybody. Which, like, I don't believe this stuff either way. But, like, yeah, it is weird that some fundies are obsessed with people going to hell and getting punitive justice, or getting raptured and getting left behind. That is fucking weird. So Judd calls the New Hope Church, and he's like, he hears a message from Bruce Barnes, the pastor who's played by this guy in the movie, who he was the only one that that didn't, like, believe hard enough according to the fundies, and he got left behind. He's the only church staff member that got left behind. And the message says, you can come here, we're running groups and stuff. So they all head to New Hope, and we don't really hear from them anymore. We just start hearing proselytizing, preaching from Bruce Barnes. I lost my wife and young children. They disappeared from their beds, and I knew immediately that I had been living a lie. I'd been to Bible college. I was a pastor, but I always thought that I could get by living for myself and never making the decision to receive Christ. Judd, I know you and your family. I'm surprised to see you here, but I'm not surprised the rest of your family is gone. You know what happened, don't you? We're gonna live through some awful days and years, but the Bible is clear that there will be a great soul harvest during this time. People will still become believers. Be assured of heaven when they die. That won't take away your sorrow, your grief, or your loneliness. Can't even imagine a day that I won't cry over what I've lost. But now I don't apologize for telling everybody who comes in here that they can receive Christ. It's really simple. God made it easy. If you want to hear this, just say so and I'll walk you through it. Vicky's like, are you saying that if we had done this before, we would not be left behind right now? And Bruce is like, yeah. The Bible says that all have sinned, that there's none righteous, not one. We can't save ourselves. Lots of people thought they could earn their way to God or go to heaven by doing good things, but that's the biggest misunderstanding. The punishment for sin is death. Jesus took our sins, paid the penalty for them by dying so we wouldn't have to. He died in our place because he loves us. When we tell Christ that we know we are sinners and then received his gift of salvation, he saves us. A transaction takes place, a deal. We go from darkness to light, from lost to found. We are saved, and the Bible says that those who receive him, he gives the power to become sons of God. The four kids sat there, each grieving in his or her own way. Judd had become humbled. Vicky felt a fool. Lionel felt a sadness so deep he didn't know if it would ever go away. Ryan was puzzled, saying Ramey had told him all this, and Ryan had thought it was stupid. He didn't think so anymore. They would discover their connections later. Judd one day realized that Ryan was the best friend of the son of the pilot, blah blah blah, they're all connected. When they watched a video from the pastor who got raptured. When the video ended, each sat stunned that the pastor had known in advance that all that was taking place. Clearly this was truth. Certainly this demanded their attention and a decision, each staring at as Bruce posed the question of the ages. Are you ready? He said. Will you receive Christ? End of book. There's a great CNN article about rapture anxiety. So let's talk about left behind as childhood trauma. Okay? Rapture anxiety, as it is often called, is recognized by some faith experts and mental health professionals as a type of religious trauma. Darren Slade, the president and CEO of the Global Center for Religious Research, has been studying trauma. Artemis! Oh my god! You're a fundy, aren't you? Will you receive Christ, kitten? Hello, Christ. I'm about to meow again. This is a real thing. It's a chronic problem, he says, of rapture anxiety. This is a new area of study, but in general, our research has revealed that religious trauma leads to an increase of anxiety, depression, paranoia, and even some OCD-like behaviors. It's me. It's my opinion that I can link my OCD directly back to growing up fundy. I did the things that he suggests here, like I need to say this prayer of salvation so many times. I need to confess my sins so often. That was me. That was stuff I did. I didn't feel like, because I didn't feel the Holy Spirit, and that's what we're taught, is that you should feel the Holy Spirit guiding you. I didn't feel that, so I convinced myself that I was not Christianing hard enough and I needed to ask for salvation again and again and again. Now imagine you are taught that that at any minute you could simply be left here on earth, what does that do to a teenager who just had premarital sex or even simply took the Lord's name in vain? It's a great question. For Christians who begin to question their beliefs, the fear of what could happen if they name their doubts out loud can be just as overwhelming as rapture anxiety itself. Very true. It's taboo to talk about, but because there's this idea that if you need to worry about the rapture, well, what have you done to worry about it? It's me. Why are you worried about being left behind if you've accepted Christ? Yeah, it's me. This lady still identifies as a Christian, but says she first questioned rapture theology when she was in her late teens after discovering that the word rapture doesn't appear in the Bible at all. Years later, she mustered the courage to ask a question in a closed Facebook group. Did anyone else genuinely think they got left behind as kids? The post received hundreds of responses. So many people said, I thought I was the only one. Slade says, suffering in silence and the threat of losing one's entire community compounds religious trauma. Finding other people who have had similar experiences can provide a much needed voice in the wilderness of doubt. It can also lead people to redefine their faith or abandon it altogether. The number of Americans identifying as Christians has been steadily dropping for years. It's projected that the 64% of Americans who currently identify as Christian will be halved by 2070, which if they keep up their bullshit, yeah, probably. I mean, I know I left. So evangelical fundamentalism, again, if you don't know, that's what I've been talking about when I say fundy. There are other religions that have fundamentalist sects. When I say fundy, I mean evangelicalism that I grew up in. So this is a religious movement characterized by sticking to traditional Christian doctrines. And my argument is that this has a significant impact on the lives of the children who grew up in it, the adults who stay in it, and the adults who don't. Impact on the lives of the kids who grew up in it, though, is really something that we need to talk about more. The culture in evangelical fundamentalist communities places expectations on kids that lead to lifelong trauma. So there's cultural expectations and religious indoctrination, which they would not agree with that last part, but there is. This idea set is marked by like a set of rigid cultural expectations that you have to adhere to that dictate nearly every aspect of your life. Dress code, gender role, religious practices, even like where you go to school. Children are indoctrinated into this culture from a young age, myself included. I grew up in it, and they want to get you in as young as possible. Your parents want you to learn this as soon as possible because they want you to learn it before you can critically evaluate this belief system that they are having you adhere to. You are expected to conform unquestioningly, and then any deviation is met with like disapproval and then you guilt yourself into staying. There is some scholarly research that suggests that children raised in fundamentalist environments struggle with identity formation due to the limited scope of self-expression allowed, which we've talked about, their, unwillingness to have individualism. The pressure to conform hinders the development of a unique identity, which is like gonna obviously lead to some psychological distress. Cognitive dissonance is something that we deal with a lot as kids who grew up in Fundyland and then later adults. There's certain research that indicates that evangelical fundy children may experience cognitive dissonance when their religious teaching conflict with their own personal beliefs and the experiences that they have in their lives, and then that dissonance leads to anxiety, guilt, being confused because you're taught one thing but your entire self is screaming at you that that's not true, and then you end up just like self-loathing which honestly that self-loathing turns to fear because you have a lot of guilt. You are being guilted over your perceived sins, and you are instilled with this fear of eternal damnation or being left behind. And some research highlights that religious fear and guilt can result in anxiety disorders, depression, low self-esteem, which all these persist into adulthood. I think my OCD was caused by this. They also teach you a lot of repression of emotions because a lot of that they teach you is sin. So there's some research that says that the suppression of natural emotions such as like anger or doubt, which is common in fundy cultures, the repression of this can have lifelong emotional consequences, leading to difficulties in forming healthy relationships and emotional regulation, which, yeah, a lot of dudes who grew up in Fundyland have major unchecked anger issues. And a lot of women are told that if you're sad, that's a sin. This upbringing is so insular. It's funny because my stepdad thinks that I'm in a bubble, and I'm like, the bubble was the thing that you created for me that I left. Reality is that their community is so insular, which leads to social isolation, and it limits your worldview, which is what they want, but especially so for children who don't have the means to access any other worldview. So they prioritize isolation from secular communities, which is why I was sent to fundy schools. And research indicates that this isolation can lead to a narrow understanding of the world and intolerance of differing perspectives. We are typically educated, indoctrinated in religious schools or homeschool programs, which I did both, using programs like ABECA, ACE, and BJU, which are all Christian fundy curriculums that emphasize doctrine over critical thinking. They never want you to learn critical thinking. And some research argues that this limited education can hinder a child's ability to engage with diverse ideas and concepts, which is majorly an issue when we grow up because we have to learn those on our own, which is really hard to learn in adulthood because we then have difficulty in integration. We struggle to integrate in mainstream society, which leads to feelings of isolation, exclusion, social anxiety, and then in extreme cases, families of children who leave their families who are in fundy sects are shunned and, excommunicated, which is even further isolating because you don't even have your family to fall back on. The culture in evangelical fundamentalist communities imposes a set of expectations on children that can result in lifelong trauma. All this to say, right? This trauma manifests in psychological, emotional, and social difficulties that persist into adulthood, and it's essential that we talk about this and be sensitive about this. And not all children raised in, fundy sects are going to experience this the same way, but we have to talk about this, and we have to talk about it in a nuanced way that understands the complex interplay of cultural expectations, religious indoctrination, and how deep that goes, social isolation, and then we can work towards fostering a more compassionate and inclusive society that includes those who were brought up in religious indoctrination, that also supports their mental and emotional well-being. But also, we have to work to undo the harm that we did, even, as kids. So in general, fundamentalism does this, but the rapture in particular is a problem. The rapture is a central tenet of fundamentalism that has profound implications for children who grew up in this. So they believe that this imminent return of Jesus Christ to rapture the believers, taking them to heaven before the tribulation and the period of the end of the world, is important to teach to kids, which is why these books exist. And this doctrine instills a sense of urgency in children and impending doom that has profound psychological effects. Some research suggests that the anticipation of the rapture can lead to anxiety in children. The fear of being left behind can be overwhelming, causing distress and nightmares, which was definitely true for me because the rapture's timing is unknown. No eye has seen, no ear has heard when the coming of the Lord is. It creates like an unknown and potentially terrifying, isolated future that a lot of bad things are going to happen to you in. Also, there's a conflict of reality here. The rapture belief conflicts with the child's everyday experiences and observations, and this cognitive dissonance again leads to confusion and emotional distress in children as they reconcile their beliefs with reality. Children experience doubt and guilt as a direct response to learning about the rapture, which again, long-lasting psychological implications. In order to conform to the ideas that we are supposed to, we suppress our emotion, which that has long-lasting psychological implications. We don't talk about the traumatic imagery of the rapture, so like these books and these movies, I would argue are just as harmful as, the things that we try to avoid kids seeing, like violence and pornography. There's research that says that this can haunt children's thoughts, leading to nightmares and anxiety disorders. We are very isolated because of the belief discrepancies between us and our peers. We feel like we cannot associate. We are told to be equally yoked with the person that we end up with because we can't be around a lukewarm Christian or a non-Christian. In fact, if I had listened to fundies, I wouldn't be with my husband now and have the life that I have now, which I'm very grateful for, because I wouldn't have been equally yoked. They told me to run instead of dating him. I shit you not. And we also don't talk about parent-child conflicts, which is something that I've experienced. I talked about earlier in the video with my own dad. I don't talk to him anymore for other reasons, but part of it is because he hates that I am not fundy. He hates that I'm an agnostic. These differences in belief lead to strained parent-child relationships. He really hates that I don't believe in this stuff. I grew up having him give me these books and have him sit down and watch these movies with me over and over, and had to listen to him go on and on about the rapture and how we're in the end of days. And the fear of separation, I never wanted to lose my dad to the rapture or to, emotional distress, but I did. And that was something I always feared. And like now I'm here. It's like my childhood fear has been realized. Now I don't feel anything, but if I were still fundy, I would. So again, just to like end that before we go into the Christofascism, already the beliefs in fundamentalism can have profound emotional and psychological impacts on children, but especially the rapture. From anxiety, fear, to cognitive dissonance, emotional suppression, this rapture doctrine that we are taught as kids can lead to lifelong trauma and emotional difficulties. It is incumbent upon religious communities and mental health professionals to address this, to ensure the well-being of children so that other kids don't grow up and have to spend thousands of dollars out of pocket in therapy because of rapture. rapture trauma. Like, you need to give a shit about the kids who are growing up in these environments now and not say, well, they're gonna go to heaven anyway, or well, they're gonna get raptured anyway, who cares if we traumatize them. Like, you need to care. I don't know how to explain to you that you need to care about children. All right, let's finish this off with Left Behind is Christofascism. So Christian eschatology and the Left Behind narrative. So first of all, Christian eschatology, which, by the way, there's this great guy on TikTok who I follow that sometimes I'm interested in hearing from, so I'll link him down below. He's very smart and knows quite a lot about biblical study and debunks a lot of fundies. So this refers to the study of end time events, often drawing from biblical texts such as the book of Revelations. So the Left Behind books and films embrace a very particular interpretation of eschatology known as premillennial dispensationalism, and there's a lot more to it. There's my god, there's this gross joke that my stepdad used to say where it's like, are you pre-trib, post-trib, or mid-trib? And I'm like, oh, actually, I don't want to believe any of that because that's super traumatizing. So the tribulation is the time period after the rapture where a bunch of terrible shit happens to people who didn't get raptured. So this belief system asserts that a period of tribulation will precede the return of Christ. No. So the tribulation is before and then the rapture? Oh man, I don't know. It's actually really confusing. Anyway, there's a tribulation, there's a rapture, there's end of days, there's all kinds of shit. I don't know. I'm having a hard time remembering the exact timeline of it, but I'll leave that guy and you can go see if he said anything about it. So this ideology serves as the foundational premise for the Left Behind books, is this, rapture theology, right? So the storyline is about the rapture and then the after effects of those who are left behind. But there's a lot more to the plot than that, because it's not just how they're dealing with being left behind, it's a lot of global politics. There's a lot of political upheaval, natural disasters, the rise of the global leader, the Antichrist, which I believe in the Left Behind films, his name was Nikolai. Wasn't he Russian? That tracks. Even a lot of Christians who aren't funny shit on the films for their sensationalism, which I don't feel like they go far enough in critiquing them, because what it really is christofascism, to me at least. So what they're doing is they're going around, they get saved, and they go around trying to save people, which is typical for fundy media in general. But the plot hinges on a lot of Christofascist bullshit. So Christofascism is a term to describe a fusion of Christianity, fundamentalist, evangelical belief, and authoritarian political ideology. So while it may not seem like to a lot of people that the Left Behind books and films promote Christofascist ideology, which in the first kids book probably not, but the adult books and definitely the movies, yes. Certain elements in the narrative are always the elements that we see in Christofascism. So the books and films portrayal of the apocalyptic events that Christians believe will happen are intended to promote a climate of fear and paranoia, which will be exploited by the authoritarian fundamentalist Christians, particularly pastors, who get involved in US politics. I'm looking at you, Billy Graham, with several different fucking pastors. What? Presidents? Wow, slip of the tongue. Christofascist ideologies use fear of impending doom to gain control over their followers and then get them to vote a certain way. There's always a clear division between real believers and non, an us versus them. The Left Behind franchise does this very much in creating a binary worldview, an us versus them, of the Christians and the non-Christians, which this us versus them mentality is very, in general, a key piece of Fundyland, where you're always called to be set apart from the world. But the hope in creating this type of media is to create a fear-induced us versus them mentality and putting fundies in positions of power to save us from the apocalypse they believe will happen and who they believe will rise up in the event of the apocalypse, which is the Antichrist, based on their interpretation of their religious text. There's a great Guardian article that says that talks about the Rapture and the Left Behind films and evangelical culture. It says, Rise of the Antichrist, which is one of the Left Behind films, expertly weaves contemporary Christian right boogeyman, which is Big Pharma, Silicon Valley, mainstream media, Davos, the COVID vaccine, and mental health experts, into an otherwise typical tale. It's the same narrative every time with Rapture films, books, and plays. The Antichrist uses World War to manipulate the UN into installing him as a leader of a global socialist government centered on the mark of the beast, a tattooed credit card, often a barcode, bracketed by the number 666 on everyone's right hand or forehead. That is not a joke. My dad and my teachers, shout out again to Mr. Terry, the now cop, taught me that we would get tattooed with a barcode if we were left behind. In like the socialist government, the Antichrist would rise up. A lot of Red Scare and religious propaganda. It's just wild. And I still have like some trauma around the scenes of the barcode stuff, the mark of the beast or the mark of the beast stuff in Left Behind. It doesn't really sit right with me because I watched it as a kid and it traumatized me. Even now I'm like kind of spooked by it. So Kevin Sorbo's film, the Left Behind film, it says, skewers the globalist mainstream media which has supposedly conspired to use COVID and now the rapture to keep people indoors, distracted and afraid, all in the name of power and profit. It's a boldly ironic stance for this movie to take, considering it rests in a tradition of using questionable theology to terrify audiences, often children and teens, resulting in lucrative bestsellers and a motivated voting base. Exactly. That's the whole thing, right? Manipulate kids and teens so that they grow up to be voters and manipulate their parents into buying them this, who are also voters, because it's Christofascism. Many end times preachers will say that the natural disasters we are seeing now are signs of the end time. Artemis! Fundies vehemently do not believe in climate change, but they will say that the natural disasters that we are seeing more and more are actually a sign that Jesus is coming soon. However, they've been saying this for literally decades. Literally decades. There's books upon books, like a bunch of reasons that Jesus will come back in 2020 or in 1980. What?
Can I eat a Pop-Tart?
Did you already eat one today?
I don't know.
You don't know if you ate a Pop-Tart today?
Yeah.
I feel like you did eat a Pop-Tart today. Don't you feel like you ate a Pop-Tart today?
I don't know.
I suppose you can have one more Pop-Tart and that's it. No more Pop-Tart after this. You got it? Okay. And don't make a mess. Thank you. Love you. See what it's like when you grow up without rapture theology? My mom would have never bought me Pop-Tarts. I'm sure you all have questions. I'm going to end it here because now that he brings up Pop-Tarts, I'm kind of hungry too. I'm sure you all have questions about funny beliefs about the apocalypse. So leave them down below and I'll answer them as much as I can. Again, a lot of it's like I don't remember the timeline, but I'll explain what I can. There's lots of great, smart people on the internet explaining how this is not all Christians that believe this. This is like a sect of Christianity, Fundyland, that believes this. So your local church goers might not be like thinking that they hope to save you before the rapture. So don't be scared of all Christians, but yes, be scared of fundies. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. Let me know if you have rapture trauma too. I know there's a lot of former fundy kids in my comments and I appreciate y'all being here. Thanks for watching. I know this was a long one. Like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hello, it's me, Trash Can Rachel, and I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons, and those are Alexander, Allie Magpie, Amanda, Bubble Tea, Cami, Chris, Claire, DJ Rocktopus, Emperor's New Blues, Aaron, Eric, Faror, Harley, Jack and Jill, John E, Kelly No K, Casey McKenzie, Kate W, Caitlin M, Quinn, Lady Kittybug, Lex, Alice, Peggy Lou, Rain, Reese, Samar, Scarlett, Shiny, and SMK. Thank you all so much for being a friend.
And before I go, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Potato Starch Marxist patrons, and those are Alicia, Am Angel, Amanda, Andy, Angelica, Anita, Artie the Ninth, Ashley, Ava, BB, Beck, Blythe, Bookish Rainrot, Ray, Bree, Brian, Caitlin, Carlin, Catherine, Kathy, Chris, CJ, Cole, Colleen, Corwin, Corey, Darren, Deborah, Diet Goth, Dorothea, Ebby, Elise, Ember, Emily A, Emily L, Emma, Aaron, Hannah C, Hannah T, Harpy Kuro, Haley, Hello There Darling, Ilianaka, India Inks, JM Tennant, Jay is on Olympus, Jen with 2 N's, Jen Michelle, Jennifer Tanner, Jenny G, Jillian, Just Pugsley, Haley, Kat, Katie, Katya, Kayala, Kendra, Kylie, Laughing Cat Dog, Laura, Lauren B, Library of Scars, Lisa, Lou Siri, Luna Moth, Lustful Octopus, Martin, Marcella, Marquita, Maz, Malara, MK Books, Molly, James, Nat, Natalie, Never, Nicole G, Nicole R, 9 Binary, Paige E, Paige P, Penny Chilling, Foxglove, Pixel Stars, Pure Raytheon, Rachel B, Rat Sarah, Reba, Rebecca, Ren, Robin, Rosie, Rowan, Other Rowan, Sequoia, Sadie, Samantha, Sarah C, Sarah H, Sarah the Bear, Shaymed, Shanae, Shannon, Shayna, Sheena K, Sean, Sophie, Stephanie, Talia, 3 Old Dogs, Tiana, Tina, Toast, Trash Can Teddy, Tino Felix, Valentine, and Writer A. Thank you all so much for being a friend.